The world held its breath as whispers spread. Had Hollywood just lost its last true legend? For hours, headlines flashed across social media feeds like wildfire. Robert Redford, gone? Fans rushed to their phones, their hearts pounding with disbelief. Tributes poured in before the truth was even known. A man who had once stood as the golden face of American cinema, now reduced to a rumor, a question mark, a ghost on trending pages. But then, silence. No confirmation, no official statement. Only the eerie hum of speculation. Was it true? Or had the world's hunger for drama written its own obituary for him? What we do know is this: Robert Redford has stepped away from the spotlight. Once everywhere, commanding screens with a charisma that defined an era, he now lives quietly, tucked away from the Hollywood circus. For many, that absence felt like death itself. And in a way, it was. The death of an era. The vanishing of a man who had symbolized both rugged rebellion and graceful dignity. Yet beneath the rumors lies a reality far heavier than gossip columns. Age has carved its marks. Tragedy has left its scars. Behind Redford's quiet retreat is a storm of heartbreak, private grief, and the cruel weight of time. A man who once embodied vitality now faces the unrelenting truth that even legends cannot escape mortality. Fans searching for him see only fragments. A rare photo here, a fleeting interview there. Each glimpse ignites a mix of relief and sorrow. Relief that he's still with us. Sorrow that he is no longer the Robert Redford etched into memory. The whispers of illness, the speculation about his frailty, all blur together into a single haunting question. How much time does he really have left? But make no mistake, this isn't just a story of decline. It's a story of survival. A tale of a man who has endured crushing personal loss, who has battled the loneliness of fading fame, who has stared directly into the face of aging with a kind of defiance few can muster. And yet, even as the world gossips about his so-called final days, the truth behind Robert Redford's story is far more unsettling. Because what he's endured, what he continues to endure, goes beyond Hollywood myth. But the real story behind Robert Redford's final days is far darker and far more human than anyone imagined. Robert Redford was never just another actor. He was the face that redefined American masculinity in the late 1960s. The man who made audiences swoon while also making them think. When he rode onto the screen in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, audiences were spellbound. Here was a man who seemed untouchable, handsome, charismatic, yet carrying a spark of rebellion that spoke to an America on the edge of cultural change. With Paul Newman by his side, Redford became half of one of the greatest duos in film history, a symbol of the golden age of cinema. His influence only grew. The Sting, All the President's Men, The Great Gatsby, Redford wasn't just starring in films, he was shaping the culture. He became a vessel for the nation's conscience, a man who could embody both romance and revolution. And when he stepped behind the camera, directing Ordinary People in 1980, he stunned critics by proving he wasn't just a face on a poster. He was a storyteller, a visionary. The film went on to win the Academy Award for Best Picture, sealing his reputation as an artist who could do it all. For decades, Hollywood worshipped him. Redford was everywhere, on screens, in magazines, in the hearts of millions. He wasn't just an actor, he was an institution, the rare kind of celebrity who commanded respect across generations. Directors wanted him, studios begged for him, and audiences trusted him. When Redford's name appeared on a marquee, people lined up around the block. But as time marched on, Even legends feel the sting of Hollywood's cruel memory. By the late 1990s and into the 2000s, the industry that once idolized him began to turn its attention elsewhere. Younger stars replaced the faces of the past. Studios chased blockbuster franchises, and suddenly, the quiet dignity of a Robert Redford performance wasn't what executives wanted to sell. And slowly, he faded from the spotlight. His roles grew rarer, his interviews fewer. For fans who once saw him as a constant presence, the absence was jarring. Hollywood has never been kind to its elders, no matter how brightly they once burned. The very machine that built him now seemed eager to move on without him. For Redford, a man who had once stood at the center of it all, this slow erasure was its own kind of death. Yet while the cameras looked away, something even more devastating was happening behind closed doors. Away from the spotlight, Robert Redford endured heartbreak that would shatter any ordinary soul. He lost his first child, Scott, to sudden infant death syndrome when the boy was just 10 weeks old. Years later, his daughter Shauna passed away. Another blow that left wounds no public recognition could ever heal. And then came the loss of his longtime partner, Sybil Sagars, whose death stripped his twilight years of the companionship he had cherished. These weren't just tragic headlines. They were devastating chapters in a man's private life endured largely out of sight. To fans, Redford was still the golden icon of their youth. But beneath that iconic smile was a man carrying grief that never truly lifted. And just when it seemed Redford would fade quietly into history, tragedy struck his family in ways too painful to believe. Every great story needs a villain. For Robert Redford, the enemy was never a single person. It was a relentless trio: time, tragedy, and the unforgiving cruelty of Hollywood itself. These forces, invisible yet merciless, stalked him long after the cameras stopped rolling, testing even the resilience of a man who once seemed untouchable. Time was the first thief. It crept in silently, softening the sharpness of his jawline, dimming the golden glow that once made him the standard of Hollywood beauty. Audiences who had idolized him as Sundance Kid or Jay Gatsby suddenly whispered about how he looked different. What was once admiration became pity, and in Hollywood, pity is the kiss of death. Studios that had once fought for his name on a poster now turned their backs, eager to crown the next youthful face. To a culture obsessed with eternal youth, Redford's aging wasn't just natural. It was treated as betrayal. And then came tragedy. In 1959, Robert and his first wife, Lola, welcomed a baby boy, Scott. For a brief, fleeting moment, the young father believed he had it all: love, family, and a career about to ignite. But fate struck cruelly. At just 10 weeks old, little Scott died suddenly, leaving Robert devastated, carrying a wound that would shadow him for life. He rarely spoke of it publicly, but friends knew it left him haunted. Years later, another tragedy struck when his daughter Shauna also passed, compounding a grief no parent should endure. These losses were not just footnotes in his biography. They were fractures in his soul. But Hollywood, ever hungry, showed little mercy. Even as he privately mourned, the industry circled like vultures. Tabloids speculated on his health. Was he sick? Was he dying? Why was he no longer seen at premieres? Headlines spoke less about his art and more about his absence, painting him as a recluse, a fading relic. Rumors of illnesses swirled, each article tightening the narrative that Robert Redford was finished, a man whose best days were behind him. The irony was brutal. This was the same Hollywood that once exalted him, that celebrated his charm, his artistry, his activism. Now it reduced him to whispers and grainy paparazzi photos. To the machine, he was no longer Robert Redford, the legend. He was Robert Redford, the headline, "Aging Star Retreats. Redford's Final Days." And yet, through it all, Robert refused to play their game. He did not rage publicly, did not beg for roles or attention. Instead, he carried his losses with a quiet dignity, retreating to his ranch, investing in Sundance, and focusing on the things that mattered most to him. While Hollywood screamed of decline, Redford answered with silence, a silence that spoke louder than any scandal. But silence, too, can be misunderstood. And as whispers grew louder, one question loomed over his shrinking presence. Was Robert Redford already halfway gone? Long before he was the golden face of Hollywood, Robert Redford was just a boy from humble beginnings. Born in 1936 in Santa Monica, California, to a modest family with no ties to the entertainment industry, he grew up far from the red carpets and flashing cameras that would later define his life. His childhood wasn't one of privilege, it was one of resilience. His father worked long hours as a milkman, instilling in Robert the value of hard work, while his mother nurtured his creativity and spirit. But even in those early years, Redford carried a restlessness, a hunger for something greater than the ordinary. As a young man, his path was anything but certain. He struggled in school, unsure of where he fit in. After briefly attending the University of Colorado on a baseball scholarship, his academic career collapsed. He turned instead to the world of art, traveling through Europe, painting, sketching, soaking in culture. In Paris, Florence, and Spain, he discovered something essential: the need to create, to express, to build beauty out of raw experience. This love for art would never leave him, even when Hollywood came calling. When Redford returned to the United States, he began chasing the dream of acting. It wasn't glamour that drew him, but the challenge of telling stories. Still, breaking into Hollywood was no easy feat. He struggled at first, typecast as the handsome young man with striking features. Casting directors saw him as decoration, not depth. But Robert wasn't interested in being another pretty face. He fought to prove himself, to take on roles that meant something, roles that allowed him to dig into the human condition. His persistence paid off when Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid exploded into theaters, catapulting him into stardom alongside Paul Newman. Yet, unlike so many of his peers, Redford never let the fame consume him. Even at the height of his career, he remained grounded in something larger than himself. He saw Hollywood for what it was, a machine that could both elevate and destroy, and he refused to be swallowed by it. Instead, he looked outward, toward causes that mattered: environmental activism, political engagement, support for Native American rights. Redford poured his influence into movements that reached beyond the screen. He wasn't content to simply entertain, he wanted to change the world. This vision took its grandest form in 1981, when he founded the Sundance Institute. What began as a simple idea, to give independent filmmakers a platform, grew into one of the most important cultural movements in modern cinema. Sundance became the birthplace of voices that Hollywood ignored, a haven for stories too bold or unconventional for the mainstream. In building it, Redford proved he wasn't just an actor or even a director. He was a visionary who believed in art as a force for truth. His career became a balance of spectacle and substance. For every box office hit, there was a meaningful project. For every glamorous event, there was a quiet day at his ranch, nurturing the land, living simply. This was Robert Redford, the man who refused to be defined by one role, one image, one moment. He was more than a celebrity. He was a cultural architect, shaping not just the films we watched, but the very way we thought about storytelling. And yet, even as his legacy grew, shadows loomed. For no matter how much influence he wielded, no matter how many hearts he touched, or movements he inspired, one truth remained. But no amount of success could shield him from the one enemy no star has ever defeated. The debate was never fought on a stage, but in the headlines, the whispers, the endless chatter of a culture that feeds on youth. Robert Redford, once untouchable, suddenly found himself cast as the defendant in Hollywood's harshest courtroom. Time. Every wrinkle, every slowed step became evidence. The tabloids declared him too old. Industry insiders labeled him irrelevant. With each passing year, the spotlight that once adored him now seemed to mock him. Yet outside the industry bubble, fans weren't ready to let go. Every time a rumor about his health surfaced, claims of illness, speculation of frailty, the internet lit up. Hashtags trended, forums filled with grief-stricken posts, and tributes appeared as though the man were already gone. Admirers clung to the memory of his iconic roles, insisting that Robert Redford was not just another actor, but a living monument to American storytelling. It was as if the world itself had split into two camps. On one side, Hollywood's ruthless machine, eager to push him off the stage, to replace him with fresh faces who promised bigger profits. On the other, millions of ordinary people who saw in Redford a reflection of their own struggles with age, loss, and identity. To them, he wasn't fading. He was fighting a battle they all recognized, one that gave them courage to face their own mortality. And so, the tension grew. With each rare public appearance, the debate flared hotter. A photograph of Redford at an event would spark waves of commentary. Some praised his enduring grace, others cruelly dissected his aging features. The clash between dignity and derision became relentless, a tug-of-war for his legacy. Would history remember Robert Redford as the golden hero of cinema? Or would it reduce him to a cautionary tale of Hollywood's forgotten? The question hung heavy, unanswered. Redford himself never entered the fray. He spoke rarely, choosing silence over defense, leaving the noise to roar around him. But silence has its own power, and in that absence, the speculation only deepened. Each time the world braced for news, it seemed one headline away from declaring his story over. And then came the whispers of his final goodbye. When the noise grew deafening, Robert Redford chose not to argue, not to defend, not to explain. Instead, he delivered his answer the way he always had, through the art of cinema. In 2018, he appeared in what he announced would be his final starring role, The Old Man and the Gun. It wasn't just another movie. It was a performance that seemed almost autobiographical, as if Redford were writing his own farewell letter to the silver screen. He played Forrest Tucker, an aging outlaw who refused to stop living on his own terms. The character's charm, resilience, and quiet defiance mirrored Redford's own career. A man who never let others dictate his story. Audiences recognized it instantly. Critics praised the film as a graceful swan song, calling it one of his finest roles. But beyond the reviews, fans felt the deeper meaning. This was Robert Redford's way of stepping out of the spotlight with dignity, refusing to let time or tabloids define him. Where others saw decline, he delivered art. Where the media painted him as fading, he proved he still had the power to captivate the world. And then, just as suddenly, he was gone. No endless farewell tours, no drawn-out speeches. Just a simple, elegant exit. A mic-drop moment from a man who understood that silence can speak louder than words. For Robert Redford, The end wasn't a defeat. It was a choice. A final act of control in an industry that so often strips its legends of grace. And in that choice, he gave his audience one last unforgettable gift. A reminder that true icons don't fade away. They bow out on their own terms. The shocking truth behind Robert Redford's final days isn't about death. It's about how to live. It's about a man who faced down Hollywood's cruelty, endured heartbreaking personal loss, and still chose to walk away with dignity. It's about a legend who refused to let gossip or rumor define him, and instead left behind a blueprint for grace, for resilience, for purpose. Because Robert Redford's story isn't one of endings, it's one of legacy. His films still breathe with the vitality of youth. His activism still inspires new generations of artists. His Sundance Institute continues to give a voice to those overlooked by the mainstream. He has proven that true greatness isn't measured by how brightly you shine when the world is watching, but by how fiercely you continue to burn when the spotlight fades. And that is why Robert Redford will never truly be gone. His name, his work, his influence, these are woven into the fabric of American culture. To those who grew up watching him ride across the screen, he will always be the Sundance Kid. To those who discovered him later, he will always be the visionary who turned independent film into a revolution. And to those who loved him as a human being, he will always be proof that even legends bleed, endure, and rise again. Because in the end, legends never truly die. They live on in us. Now it's your turn. What is your favorite Robert Redford moment? Which film, which performance, which cause moved you the most? Share your memories in the comments. We want to honor him together. And if you believe in stories like this, subscribe, join our Talksberry community, and help keep alive the spirit of legends who remind us how to live.